Welcome to the webinar today. Today's webinar is on the local imperative on policy and the use of AI. Good afternoon, everyone. We're thrilled to have you join us today for this exciting webinar. Whether you're seasoned or just learning about this topic, we have a wealth of insights from the panel speakers today. I am Michael Suarez, Marketing Specialist with Smart Cities Connect, a brand of Tech Connect. Before we dive into our engaging discussion, let me quickly run through what you can expect during our time together today. Firstly, we have a great panel of speakers who will bring a wealth of experience and expertise. They'll be sharing their insights and offering valuable perspective. In order for a smooth discussion with our audience, all audience members will be on mute. Following that discussion, we'll open it up to floors for questions. We encourage active participation, so please feel free to submit any of your questions in the Q&A feature, and we'll do our best to address any of those questions during the Q&A session. Without further ado, let's kick off today's webinar on the local imperative, policy, and use. Your moderator today will be Mark Wittenberg.
Michael, thank you so much for the introduction. Appreciate it. Like Michael said, I'm Mark Wittenberg with the City of Raleigh. I'm the Chief Information Officer here. I'd like to take a moment to introduce my esteemed panel today. We have Keith Briggs, who is the Head of Enterprise Architecture and Innovation for the state of North Carolina. We have Chris Butts, who is the Chief Information Officer for the town of Chapel Hill. We also have Nicole Coughlin, who is the Chief Information Officer for the town of Cary. And then last but certainly not least is the infamous Jonathan Feldman, who is the Chief Information Officer for Wake County. Well, first of all, I think you might hear, it's like this is a Smart Cities Connect, but I want to start off by just saying that I think what's so important for anything like this, a new technology, is really to have a regional partnership. And so that's why I'm really thrilled actually to have representations from towns, from cities, from the county, and also from the state, because I feel like this journey is not just about a smart city, it's about the smart region, and really the challenges that we all face don't stop at the borders of our city. So thanks again to the panel. So to kick it off, maybe we can start with John and say, what are you all doing around governance, policy, and procurement in Wake County?
Absolutely. So, we had the same moment that everyone else had, right, in November, or a year and some ago, where everyone started talking about ChatGPT. Everyone was saying AI, and my approach to that kind of thing is get folks together and across disciplines and talk about it and say, look, this is a new thing. It's not going away like everything else, right? From the internet to the cloud, not going away. It does have risks, like everything from the internet to the cloud. And so how do we neither put our heads in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist, nor charge forward recklessly, right? And so our CISO did a nice job of getting folks together, seeing what others had done, Seattle, Boston, San Jose, and putting together a set of guidelines and shopping them and saying, can you live with it? And everyone from the internal compliance folks to the external, hey, we want to get stuff done. We want to get stuff done faster, better. Folks seem to really resonate with it. Happy to go into that during the Q&A if folks want details. Thanks, Mark.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And it's so interesting you would mention San Jose because they've started a Gov AI coalition. And if you haven't heard about that, we can certainly put out some information. But they're working on getting, I think, over 160 local and state county governments together to really talk about policy, and more than just policy. It's like policy, incident response, procurement, and kind of all those risks around that. Chris, how about in Chapel Hill?
Yeah, I mean, our approach very similar to Jonathan. We did eventually get out an interim policy, recognizing that this is going to rapidly change, and and might come out with something more permanent later once we fully understand everything. But really what's contained in that interim policy is our governance structure. And so this was something new that we've seen, but we really approached it like any other piece of technology, where it still has to go through our technology steering committee, which is a group of leaders in the town. So if somebody wants something that has an AI component to it, that the process isn't a different process. It's still going to flow through our established structure that we have in the town. And so that's really what our interim policy is guiding people back to, reminding them what the procedures are for anything new that they want to bring or they want to bring into a department.
That's awesome. And so it sounds like as part of that, it's like you were already doing some AI and some of that before. So it's like, okay, how can we just kind of pivot just a little bit, but use what we have today? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and I think we all here we're specifically talking about generative AI, where we've all been using a piece of AI. I know, our cybersecurity software, we've been using AI for a long time, learning our computer machine. So yeah, it's just kind of it's definitely it's been a disruptor, but it's still following the same path as everything else.
Yeah. Nicole, we're going to go over to you really quick because we had this conversation about Carrie is talking about not creating a policy but a procedure. Maybe you can dive a little bit into that and the difference. And
I don't know if there's going to be much difference, but I'm glad that Chris, that you brought up that it was generative AI, because I want to just make that clear that we've got a standard procedure and it is clearly focused on generative AI. I think it sounds like we all did did the same thing, which was go look at what was out there, right? Learn from our other friends and partners in local municipalities and see what they had, and then sort of see what fits for Carrie at the moment, right? So we went with the procedure. We did that very intentional because we know that it's changing. We know we need to get some training around it. We know that we're continuing to learn. So we went with the procedure just to make it is technically just so that it's easy for us to change it. So we don't have to keep going back to council and making it a policy. But saying internally, it's the same impact.
Thank you, appreciate that. Now, Keith, from a state, I'm going to actually put you on the spot a little bit because I think one of the concerns is, okay, we can make these policies at the state and the county level, or I mean at the city and the county level, but then at the state and federal level, what controls are you all talking about as far as policy, and then how could those potentially roll down to the rest of us?
Yeah, it's a good point. So I'll first say that I think it's good to hear that there's consistency, whether it's a process or a policy. I think we're taking the right steps to learn, educate ourselves, and then apply guidance to the best we can, as it's important, right? With generative AI, it's really the ability to create new content, and that content needs to be validated and verified before consumed. At the state level, I'll start by saying maybe we aligned a little bit more to Carrie than we did with the generation of a policy, partly because it is a learning curve. The environment's changing so quickly, we're learning it probably slower than it's changing, and policy is a little bit more established and harder to react to faster. So what we did was we developed an AI framework. Again, it's made up of a bunch of processes. Similar to Chapel Hill, it's grounded in existing processes already. So whether that's implementation, technical review, architecture, procurement. And what we did was we extended existing processes to be able to capture the right attributes and artifacts relating to AI or generative AI use, so that we could kind of make sure that we're looking at the right things as we go through it. One thing about our framework, and I would say we're in final throes of the draft for publication, is that it certainly there to help all the state agencies, commissions, boards, offices in their efforts with generative AI. But it also should be a reference to any, local governments that maybe don't have the resources to establish one of their own or is looking for guidance. And I don't know who's in attendance on the call today, but if anybody has any questions about our state AI framework, please reach out to us and we'll certainly talk to them about it.
And I love that idea of catching the right, capturing the right artifacts so that we can start to have that conversation. Because I'm kind of curious, it's like, how are you all having that conversation about like developing the policy, developing these guidelines, and then like what are the primary concerns that you hear? Maybe Jonathan, we can start back with you again.
Yeah, it's all about, for me, when you're talking about this generative, or may I say augmented, right, intelligence that we see out there, right? That's how we're framing it at Wake, because it's not just to generate stuff. It's also to assist with decision making and that kind of thing. But it all boils down to data. And at the end of the day, nobody wants to be Samsung, right? The Samsung of government, where you basically put confidential stuff into an AI, generative or otherwise, that's going to share it elsewhere. Where Mark puts confidential stuff in, and then Jonathan says, "Hey, tell me about Mark's stuff," and then the AI lively does that. So there's so much that is not known about the behaviors of these models. The math is really complicated. It's fairly chaotic. There's a certain amount of probabilistic, stochastic parrot stuff going on. And so the last thing you want to do, and I think this is something we have support for at every level at Wake County, is nobody wants to be the one who ends up, in the newspaper because they used an AI model to do something goofy with data, when we all know that these models, the publicly available models, are not ready yet. Now, this is not to say we're putting a head in the sand, because there's a tremendous amount you can do with public data, right? We're working on our enslaved persons project using AI. We're working on our restrictive deeds project using AI, but this is all publicly available information. You can still get tremendous value from this without completely going crazy and driving your car off the cliff, right? So that's where I'm coming from with that.
Jonathan, can I jump in, Mark? Ask a question.
Yep, absolutely.
So, because you had a good point, Jonathan, I want to explore it a little more about, one, I totally agree with you. It's all about the data. And I think somehow that gets lost, that this is not new, like it's all about the data. The other point is, I'd just like to hear your perspective, and actually anyone's, on the confidence level and the training, or how are you communicating the risks of putting in someone's review with all of their information and, asking you about, I'm using that as an example, but how are we communicating, like, what is your methods? I'm just, being a little selfish, but probably for everybody else out there, like, what have you guys found that's been successful or still working?
If I could jump back, 2 seconds. We did a road show with our extended leadership team, and everyone's mind just blew up. We spent a long time putting together a presentation. We put together some examples. We did, basically some not live demos, but some demos, and everyone's heads just totally exploded. And there was a lot of interest and a lot of healthy concern, but also healthy excitement about moving it forward. Other folks, how about y'all?
Go ahead, Chris, and then I was going to pick on Keith again.
From the town Chapel Hill, Nicole, we're really just still exploring this, and some of the use cases have been just easy, low-hanging fruit where we can get some easy wins. So right now our communication is, don't put any of that sensitive data in there yet. And maybe there's some pieces of software or some development that we can then later we can tap into that. But right now we're just really putting information in there that's going out to the public anyways. Our commissioner memos and forming job descriptions and easy things like that.
And then Keith, I know we were just talking earlier this week about your chief data officer and some of the concerns that the state has around, data loss prevention. And then we all know the famous, garbage in, garbage out. If we have poor data quality, how is that going to impact the model? So maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's part of what Nicole said, but also for what we're seeing in kind of validation is have the experts, have the subject matter experts be the final step in output, right? And so if you're using generative for any purpose, the final step of that purpose until we really get to a high level of confidence should be some validation. So if we're looking at it from a standpoint of and by the way, similar, Jonathan, Chris, Nicole, we're really only looking at those elements that represent publicly available data right now. I don't think, although we're certainly on the innovation side looking at other use cases, there's an appetite to push it with public information. There's not the appetite to risk it with non-public information or confidential information. And I also think as part of the learning curve, you might as well get some wins learning it with something that's a low risk opportunity. But I think, Mark, to your point, and it doesn't matter if it's, GDAC or if it's, Department of Information Technology. GDAC is our Government Data Analytics Center, or Department of Information Technology, or Department of Transportation. We really need to make sure that we're validating the results before they actually get released to the public or released to the consumer constituents. And I think that's the one piece. I also will say this: our framework orients itself around two basic principles. Don't use, internet open source generative AI. And when you do use a secure AI capability, make sure you do it responsibly. And a part of that responsible use is validating the output.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point.
That is an absolute great point. So I've got a question for the panel. It's like, okay, the validation. One of the things we put into our policy is that a human should validate this. But I also think that I think we've seen over time that we as humans become dependent on technology to the point where we trust it more and more, right? As it's correct more and more often, that trust starts to build. So I wonder if anybody would like to take the thought of, if that human validation is there and we're starting to trust the technology, what does that look like over time?
I think don't let your guard down, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because here's what happened to Air Canada, right? Air Canada's chatbot answered a question wrong. A consumer took action on it, and then the company said, no, you can't do that. But your chatbot told me, and they got sued and they lost. And so one of the use cases we've been piloting, right? Public data can't be a problem, can it? Well, it might be. What if your chatbot comes back with the wrong answer? And we're trying to figure that out for one use case that we'd like to launch, but boy, did Air Canada give me a little pause on that one, right? So don't let your guard down.
So you don't think this won't fly right off the bat? That's a little Air Canada joke. Sorry. Are we allowed to do that?
Mark, you're always saying things on the wing.
Let's go Nicole and then Keith.
Sorry, I'm curious because we do ask that. Obviously, we want some human to read it and make sure and validate whatever. But we also do ask that if you use, a Chat GPT or any of those Copilot, whatever it may be, that you cite the source.
Mm.
Yeah, good point.
Which might have helped from the airline. I don't know if they cited it with some other source. Who knows?
Keith?
One of the things that Jonathan said, and I think the airline is a good example, is by the nature of generative AI, it's programmed to please the human asking the question. And so we've all heard of you know, when it gives you when it makes up an answer. Right? I can't think of the word right now.
Hallucination.
Hallucination.
I was thinking of hypnosis, and it's not hypnosis.
Close.
Could be. But think about it. It's a software program, right? And it's instructed to use information, but its most important thing is to give an answer. And so as we look at how this develops, we've got to get into things like retrievable augmented generation, something that says, hey, you can speak the language, you can talk to me, and I can understand what you're asking, but I'm not going to let the AI have out of bounds capabilities to respond any way it wants. I'm going to refine it to say only respond from this data set. And if you can't find it within this data set, do not give me a response at all or tell me I don't know. And I think that'll come with maturity. And it will also come with our own maturity in developing the data sets that are most responsible to our use cases. Today, when you go on to ChatGPT, I play with it a lot, and I use it as part of a roadshow. I can ask it information about a general topic, but is also somewhat timed in a calendar, and it'll give you a historical information. But then if you ask more information about something that has been happening recently, it may make up hallucinations based upon reference information it has. It's not correct. However, if I feed it a document that gives it all of the current information, like the winner of last year's Super Bowl, it will not only give me all the historical information that it has from open source, but then it will tell me specifically who that Super Bowl winner is, because I'm limiting where it can get that information from, and I've already verified that that's true. And so I think our maturity will help with what we're seeing here.
Well, I'm gonna pivot us because I can't believe it's gonna be almost 2:30 already, or at least our time. But absolutely, Keith, it's kind of like one of those, like, where are we all in that journey? Because we all have these concerns. We're trying to get around policy, but I also think it would be fun to just talk about where are you all in that journey, and maybe Chris, where is Chapel Hill? I mean, what are some of those use cases that you're looking at for improving your community, or what are you doing today?
Well, one of the use cases is what our town initiative of plain language, and so we're really using generative AI to help us with some of the language that we're putting out. So what plain language is, to not go into too much detail on that, is really trying to bring communication that's coming out from the town on a very simple, easy to understand level. So we have our non-English speakers in the town, and really just there's a lot of times just a lot of, federal government is a great example of just you reading a document and not understanding what it's actually saying, right? So plain language is trying to simplify it, and using generative AI is really helpful in doing that, because it already uses those parameters to where I type something out, says it's grade 12, and I can use generative AI to bring it down to like a grade 7, which is really helpful because it's really hard to do if you're just trying to do that on your own. So that's where we've explored first in this journey of really using the generative AI.
I love it, bringing more accessibility, and then it's multilingual, right? How about the town of Cary, Nicole?
Yeah, so I'm actually we're exploring, I think, like everyone else, but I'm actually gonna share a use case that I would love to do that came from my good friend Mike Sherwood in Las Vegas that was with them a few weeks ago. And I liked it for one of the reasons that Keith said, which is it's very contained information, right?
Mm.
So what he had showed was a prototype of an AI virtual assistant around all of their benefits information. Right. So tell me what what's my vision care, right? How much is do we get for glasses? So it was very tangible information. Also fed back the document, was available on your phone. So it was great for our folks that are in the field. And it's also information that sometimes personal experience, like it's hard to kind of go through. Like it's lengthy and weedy in there. So having all of that at that one place, I thought that was a great, like really good, simple use case that you could just learn a lot from. And again, the data's contained, right? So I'm sharing his example because I thought it was great, and I want to be like Mike Sherwood.
Doesn't everybody want to be like Mike Sherwood? But I love that because, again, we were talking about the data, keeping it contained, but then also keeping it internal, which is testing the technology before we take that public. John, how about Wake County?
So I mentioned 2 use cases, and I'll briefly go a little bit more into that. Our Register of Deeds has 2 projects, one called the Enslaved Persons Project, where volunteers go through all kinds of records to find out, what was the ownership of enslaved people in Wake County. Now, this is important to some folks because it tells you ancestry, for example. It's also just a very grim reminder of history, and it's sort of an anti-erasure kind of thing where we're lifting up that this really happened and this was terrible and whatnot. There's also a restricted deeds project that's going on where volunteers have to laboriously go through thousands of pages to figure out which of the deeds have racial restrictions in them. And there are wonderful volunteers doing this work, but some of our geniuses in Wake IS have helped out by saying, hey, there is an AI technology here that can read this document for you, that can interpret this for you. And better yet, using the co-pilot metaphor, can lift it up for you and say, hey, is this one? You think this is one? Yes? Great. So that's in flight right now, and that's really exciting because it saves the volunteers a lot of time, or potentially. And the other one that we're working on that we currently have internal is we have a unified development ordinance that's about this thick, and so being able to ask questions of a chatbot, an AI chatbot, is fabulous. And it's working great internally, but see also Air Canada. So we're trying to figure out how can we release that without incurring, massive problems. And I liked what Nicole said about citing sources. The problem is if you're piecing together 12 sources in a document this thick, it becomes problematic. So to Keith's point, this may have to wait until less hallucination happens, and that as we all know, that famous case where the lawyer used citations that didn't exist and then got censured by the court, for that. The AI can make it very convincing that it has citations that don't exist, right? We asked it, just briefly, we asked it to put together a chart, a data analysis of a data set, publicly available data set. It made up column headings. So unless you check, you don't know, is my point. So it's just constant vigilance. How about you, Keith?
Yeah, the state is working on a bunch of different things. I think a lot of it orients around virtual assistants or job supplementation. I will say, and then I know Michael wants to jump in here, we've prototyped what I call private GPT, right? We don't want people to upload stuff in the public domain, because we have a procurement group. They consult. Their job is to consult with every other agency to help them through their procurement process. Well, they might get contracts or documents or legal stuff, legal agreements that are hundreds of pages long. So what you can do is you can load it in and then you can ask questions of it. Well, to prove the point, Mark, we had a preliminary meeting for this call, and Mark wrote up 3 or 4 pages of notes, right? So I came back and I threw it in the prototype and I said, give me a 1-paragraph summary of why we're here. And I won't read it to you, but it was spot on. It was fabulous. And I didn't give it any other constraints other than Mark's notes. So, I mean, I think there's a place for it. We just have to keep working, learning, maturing, and I think there's going to be a great value.
Agree.
Awesome. Thank you. We have a couple of questions, and they are very similar to what the discussion has been about, Keith. So, but if there's any final thoughts you guys want to share before I jump into that, feel free. You're good? Okay.
Let's hear the questions, Michael.
Yeah, we have a couple, but I think I'm going to choose this one because I think it would help a lot of city leaders. It said, what are some key considerations for cities to look into when adopting AI solutions, especially in the terms of data privacy and security? And this is open to anyone.
Except for the state and county people. No.
No, it's all inclusive. Who wants to jump in on that one?
Well, I'll throw out one comment, and I don't know if we really touched on it as a group, but I think it is a whole nother section to look at. Is we're all talking about developing Gen AI tools. We're obviously not talking about developing LLMs or anything, large language models, but how do we leverage it? There's a whole nother thought, and that is every partner that we've ever had and every partner that we will have in the future will have some kind of AI integration. And how would we go about evaluating the partner and whether or not they're ethical and responsible and they're secure and they're covering our data, privacy issues on our behalf? And I think this might be part of the question, Michael, that you're asking. One of the things that state's doing is we're integrating what I talked about, the attributes and the artifacts into statewide IT procurement. So as we go through a procurement of a partner, either a vendor solution, SaaS, whatever, we're going to start asking those questions so that we can become knowledgeable of how the partner is answering it. And one of the things that we've done is we've matured our what's called a PTA, or a privacy threshold analysis process. So the old one didn't really get into the artificial intelligence space. The new one really starts to direct questions around ensuring that privacy is a consideration if you're using AI. And in the very near future, anytime you're going to go through the procurement process, whether that's a contract for service or to buy a product, you'll have to answer that PTA as part of the AI understanding.
Just to add to that, Keith, I think the software bill of materials, the famous SBOM, I hate adding requirements, okay? I'm like a simplify kind of person, but software bill of materials seems to be a good place to me to figure out what exactly do you mean by AI this, AI that? Is it really throwing it into an LLM? Is the LLM a public LLM? Is it a private LLM? Is it just machine learning like we've been doing for 15, 20 years? What is it? And so, somewhere along the line, folks have to be specific because there's so much AI washing going on right now. I can't tell you, like every single one of my vendors is saying, we have AI this, AI that. Well, not really in a lot of cases. It's, it's the old stuff, but it's the new stuff that's more worrisome, to Keith's point.
One of the other keys is just, we're already starting to talk about, and this was part of the San Jose, the coalition was talking about an AI incident response plan, which is if something does get out there, like how do you purge the data? Because you can have the data policies, you can have the data privacy policies and all those things, but at the end of the day, it just takes one person to put something into a public chat bot that then compromises, potentially compromises the organization. So how do you have how do you handle that incident? And then is there a way to purge the data? And I love Keith and John, what you're talking about the third parties, because that's outside of our control.
Great. Another question, this one's a little lengthy one, but let's see how this goes. It says, anyone using the open source LLMS and working with third parties to host their LLMS for training on your own open records, like permitting process. If MSP for this cropped up, would you consider them, or are you more comfortable working with AI tools from established IT providers like AWS, MS, Google, or even government tech providers like Tyler Technologies?
I can certainly start the answer. I think the way that we're looking at it at state level, and I talked about keeping the framework simple, don't do anything in the open space, and look at privatizing, meaning build a secure wall or a boundary around that data. The big cloud providers are very well set up, at least early on, to develop a private access to an LLM, right? And what it does is it allows for an entity to access an LLM that has enough information in it that it becomes usable, whether it's chatbot or summary or content creation. But it also makes sure that anything that's loaded into the application is not making its way back into the next version of the LLM that Jonathan was talking about, right? That's critical. The state is not looking at doing it in their own LLM. We're not going to build a government-specific, industry-specific LLM. It's just too costly. We can't host it. That is not an endeavor that we want to go down. And we really haven't partnered with a, I guess, small industry-specific LLM partner. I have a friend that works at LexisNexis, and they're a legal data company, and they are working on a legal industry LLM. We haven't partnered with any of them yet. We're looking at the large, trillion record LLMs that are in Azure OpenAI or Google Gemini, or Bedrock from AWS as being that foundation of AI, generative AI. But again, we're doing so in a way that is privatized and secure, not anything open.
I'd love to hear from Nicole and Chris about this, but then I want to weigh in about the open source thing, please.
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, from our perspective, what we're going to do is what we've done always with everything is really first look at our enterprise level software first, and that's products like our Microsoft or Esri, and we have Tyler. So we'll start with our enterprise first, and then maybe once we take a look at that, if there's gaps, that's when we'd start looking at more specific, smaller design. But we don't, we're also not in the open source LLMS. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Yeah, I think we're in the same boat, and to be honest, we're a ways away from, I think, looking at that. But I thought it was interesting that they brought up some of the actual vendors. I think understanding what are they doing with the data and the use behind it. Wasn't quite sure what they were trying to get at with that part of the question. But we have so much, I'm gonna be honest, we have so much learning to do first. So I feel like everything's kind of got to be internal. I'm like, let's keep learning and learning and learning before we're ever going to experiment and build our own LLMs. But that's my personal take.
Michael, to the open source question, I feel like there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt that vendors like to throw at open source. And, it's just not necessary. Let's remember that OpenAI was started as a foundation, as an open source, good for humanity type of thing before it got hijacked and taken private to pad some folks' pockets, right? So the fact that something is open source does not make it risky. The thing that makes open source not risky is you actually have transparency into algorithms. And so that is actually a benefit. The thing that makes open source, the only thing that makes open source risky is a lack of a maintainer, right? Because then when security issues happen or big issues happen, there's no one to maintain it. There's no one to fix it. So if there was an MSP that's, the equivalent of, hey, it's Red Hat, we're going to provide service and support for this open type of AI, why not? But I think Chris made a fantastic point that if you've got something in your portfolio that'll handle it, listen, as a CIO, you are always struggling to keep the number of software packages to a dull roar. And so to the extent that you can keep it within your portfolio, that's a good thing. I just don't think there's an inherent, I know there's not, and would argue with anyone, there's not an inherent risk in open source. And so I want to just set the table or leave the table set that way. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Those were great responses. We have time for one more question. And I like this one because it has to do with the community. It says community engagement will be critical as we continue to implement AI. What are our obligations to teach the community with respect to this technology? And how can we have those conversations with residents about complicated technology?
That's funny because that was actually one of the questions we were going to talk about was just how do you have that conversation, not only with the community, but with the policy or the folks that make the policy, our city council, state legislature and such. And to me, it feels like having that conversation with the policymakers first to really understand how is this going to be deployed. And then with community engagement, that's something that's really important to us here at the City of Raleigh, is just making sure that we are transparent. And that's where I think having those, having the, I keep using like policy, but it's like the policymakers and then the policy, but the policy is around the guardrails that we put around this technology to ensure that the community is safe. And that's our responsibility today. Really, the responsibilities aren't changing. It's just that this is a new tool, right? This is a new tool in the tool belt. It's something that's revolutionary. It's a little bit scary because, like John was talking about, we may not know what's behind the curtain. And so I think it's important to have those conversations, be transparent. This is how we're planning to use it. These are the policies, these are the guardrails, these are the use cases, and this is what the journey is going to look like as we get started.
Does anyone have anything else they want to add?
Okay, Mark said it so well, the rest of us are like, ditto.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, I mean, if there's any, does anyone have any last minute remarks before we end our webinar?
I would just say, sorry, John. I would just say this is a new technology, but this isn't an outcome. It's a tool. It's a tool in the tool belt, and don't be afraid of it. Put healthy guidelines and guardrails around it, just like we would any other new technology. But really, I think it's important for us, especially as IT leaders, to really explore what the technology can do, and then be very mindful, again, about the community, the impacts to the community, and positive and negative impacts that it could potentially have when you're deploying.
One of the things that I share with our leaders at the county is it's so tempting to believe that free is fun, free is excellent, free is high value. But I tell them, if you're getting it for free, AI, it's probably dangerous, right? So I think that's something for folks to bear in mind, that there is a cost to this. If there is no cost to the product, then you are the product, and you probably don't want to be selling your city, county, state data for the pleasure of being able to use a product. It's much better to sign a contract, get some assurances, get some licensing, and understand to what extent your data will be feeding the model or not feeding the model. So, but all that in short, if it's free, it's probably dangerous. Pass it on.
Awesome, thank you. Well, as we wrap up today's discussion, I'd just like to extend my gratitude to all the speakers for their insight. Let's keep this momentum and conversation going. And remember to mark your calendars for our upcoming gathering in Raleigh this May, where we'll dive deeper into the realm of smart cities. Looking forward to seeing you all there. And let's stay connected. You can find us on LinkedIn and on Twitter at Smart Cities Connect. Awesome. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks all.